In 244 AC, while King Aegon V ruled the Seven Kingdoms, the heir to the Iron Throne, Prince Jaehaerys, and his sister wife, Princess Shaera, had their first child, naming him Aerys Targaryen. While still in his early teens, Aerys was wed to his sister Rhaegar at the command of their father, Prince Jaehaerys, who heard a prophecy from a woods witch, which he interpreted to mean the legendary prince who was promised would be born of their bloodline. Although Aerys and his sister wife did not love each other romantically, they did their duty and produced a son they named Rhaegar. He was born in 259 AC on the same day as the Tragedy of Summerhall, which killed King Aegon V, his first son Prince Duncan, and many more. The crown then passed to King Jaehaerys II, with Prince Aerys becoming a father and heir to the Iron Throne at the age of 15. Aerys spent most of his childhood in King's Landing, where he befriended a young Tywin Lannister who was serving as a cupbearer to the king, and Steffon Baratheon, who served as a page in the royal court. All three young men would fight for the royal forces during the War of the Ninepenny Kings in 260 AC, with Prince Aerys earning his knighthood, granted the honor by his friend Tywin, who was already a knight. 2 years later, King Jaehaerys died of illness, and the crown passed to his sole son and heir, who would come to be known as King Aerys II. In those early days, Aerys was a young, handsome, and charismatic ruler, and while not particularly skilled in the day-to-day administration of the realm, he made the wise decision of appointing his longtime friend Tywin Lannister as Hand of the King, and together they brought 12 years of peace and prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms. While Tywin handled the governing of the realm, Aerys occupied himself by keeping an active and energetic royal court in King's Landing. To begin, he replaced the court officials of his father with a younger generation of nobles, filling the halls of the Red Keep with beautiful young maidens from across Westeros, and hosted many balls and festivals encouraging music and dancing. Desiring to be the greatest ruler the Seven Kingdoms had ever known, he thought up grand and ambitious plans to build his legacy, though made no effort to accomplish any of his goals, quickly losing interest in his own ideas. Among the many failed plans of King Aerys II were his desire to invade and conquer the Stepstones, in order to add those territories to the kingdom. He then later desired to invade the far north beyond the wall, sending his armies against the wildling tribes in order to build a second wall further north, adding to the conquered lands of the kingdom. He also once announced he was going to build a new city of white marble on the south bank of the Blackwater, after complaining about the foul smell of King's Landing. The king then continued his meaningless proclamations, threatening to construct a massive naval fleet to invade and conquer Braavos, after a dispute with the Iron Bank, and on a trip to Dorne, claimed he would build an underwater canal in the territory to make the desert bloom with life. Yet while Aerys enjoyed the pleasures of being king, announcing grand plans that would never be completed, the Hand of the King, Tywin Lannister, was ensuring the prosperity of the realm. In 267 AC, Tywin resolved the kingdom's dispute with the Iron Bank, using his own wealth to settle much of the debt. He also created unity and goodwill amongst the nobility by revoking the rights of the commoners enacted by Aegon V, and improved relations with merchants by lowering tariffs on shipping to Old Town, Lannisport, and King's Landing. Tywin also dealt relatively fairly with the common people, punishing bakers who mixed sawdust into their bread, and butchers who sold horse meat as beef. He invested in infrastructure, repairing and building roads, and held tournaments to delight and entertain both nobility and the small folk. With so much being accomplished by the Hand and so little by the ruler himself, many began to gossip about Tywin being the true king and Aerys his mere puppet. And while they had been friends for many years, Aerys resented the acclaim being given to his servant, and in time grew more bitter and jealous of Tywin's accomplishments. Adding to the king's troubles would be a number of personal tragedies he would suffer with his wife Queen Rhaegar, who had a miscarriage in 263, then another in 264. In 267, she gave birth to a stillborn girl they named Shaena, and in 269 she gave birth to Prince Daeron Targaryen, who died within half a year. In 270, Rhaegar again had a miscarriage, and after so many failed attempts to produce another child, Aerys was convinced she was cheating on him, and that the gods were killing the children so that a bastard would not sit the Iron Throne. And so he hid his wife away in Maegor's holdfast, ordering that 2 septas sleep in her bed to ensure she stayed faithful to the king. Aerys sank deeper into depression and madness with each passing tragedy, but at last in 274, his wife gave birth to a boy they named Jaehaerys, and for a time the king partially recovered from his his despair. But when the boy died later that year, Aerys snapped, executing the child's wet nurse and her family. In 276 AC, Queen Rhaegar finally gave birth to a healthy child they named Prince Viserys Targaryen. But the king had grown extreme in his paranoia and fear, burning all gifts sent to the child and isolating the boy, forbidding all from seeing him except for the king's guard who accompanied the child at all times. This increasing instability caused further problems for the kingdom, as Aerys began overruling Tywin's decisions for no reason other than his jealousy and pride. When the hand of the king sided with House Blackwood in a dispute in the Riverlands, the king declared for House Bracken. When war broke out between Volantis and the cities of Lys and Tyrosh, Tywin suggested neutrality, and so the king provided money and weapons to Volantis. When Tywin offered his brother, Tigett Lannister, as master-at-arms for the Red Keep, the king again overruled him and named Sir Willem Darry to the position. Aerys also hatched a scheme to damage Tywin's reputation, increasing tariffs in the 3 cities Tywin had lowered them. When the merchants came to the capital to complain, Aerys blamed Tywin for the decision and vowed to lower the tariffs, making himself look like the hero coming to save the day. With so much tension and bitterness being fostered between the old friends, Tywin hosted a tournament at Lannisport in honor of the birth of Prince Viserys, then offering his daughter Cersei Lannister as a wife for Prince Rhaegar, in order to reconcile with the Targaryen king, reaffirming their friendship and alliance. But the Mad King refused and insulted House Lannister, claiming Cersei was not fit to marry his son, then abruptly leaving the tournament before even the final feast. Back in King's Landing, Aerys would continue his campaign to contradict Tywin at every turn, this time with how they would deal with the Defiance of Duskendale, when Lord Denys Darklyn, in a bid to gain more autonomy for his territory, stopped paying taxes, asking that the king come to Duskendale to discuss the matter in person. Although Tywin strongly suggested that the king refuse, Aerys accepted and fell right into a trap, seeing him captured and his men killed. Tywin was then left to deal with the rebellion, and so mobilized the royal army, laying siege to the town. However, the army could not attack for fear that the king would be executed, and so it was that Sir Barristan Selmy of the King's Guard mounted a rescue mission on his own, climbing the walls of the city, creeping through the streets, and infiltrating the rebel fortress, then finding and freeing the king, making a mad escape through the front gates, on stolen horses, killing any and all who tried to stop them. Sir Barristan earned a place in the songs for his heroic actions. However, many years later, the man would reflect upon his deeds, believing that perhaps it would have been better to let the king die in his cell. For King Aerys was no longer the handsome, charismatic man of his youth. After so many personal tragedies, years of court intrigue, and now his time as a prisoner of war, Aerys was slipping into an ever-worsening insanity that would see him nicknamed the Mad King. He began seeing plots and schemes around every corner, refusing to leave the Red Keep for years, and ordering that no one could approach him with a blade, save for the King's Guard, which meant he was unable to cut his hair or trim his nails. He was also now convinced his former friend Tywin Lannister and eldest son Rhaegar were conspiring against him, and had wanted him to die in Duskendale, so they might rule the 7 kingdoms in his place. Needing new allies, he sent word to the Stormlands, summoning his childhood friend Lord Steffon Baratheon to King's Landing, naming him to the small council. Aerys then sent Steffon to Volantis on a mission to find a worthy bride for his son Rhaegar. However, the mission ended in failure, with Steffon's ship destroyed during a storm, killing the noble lord as he returned to Storm's End. The Mad King interpreted the death of his last true friend as an elaborate plot to kill the one man he could trust, believing Tywin had conspired to murder the Lord of the Stormlands, knowing that the king planned to name Steffon as his hand when he returned from his mission. His paranoia grew so deep that he even feared ordering Tywin's death, believing that if he did so, Tywin or else his supporters would have him assassinated in reprisal. And so the king summoned a foreigner from across the sea named Varys, who had earned a great reputation as a spy master, believing that because he was not a native Westerosi, he had no relevant loyalties, and so could be trusted to a reasonable extent. He then arranged a marriage with Doran Martell's daughter, Elia, and his son Rhaegar, creating an alliance with Dorne to ensure they continued supporting Targaryen rule. The king was now becoming increasingly hostile and violent within the Red Keep, obsessed with wildfire and burning his enemies alive, even befriending pyromancers and filling his court with men of the Alchemist's Guild. Aerys was even known to become sexually aroused after watching people burn, immediately finding and brutalizing his wife after an execution. In continuing to insult House Lannister, he named Tywin's eldest son Jaime to the Kingsguard, thereby robbing Tywin of his heir and publicly embarrassing him by having his dwarf son Tyrion as the potential heir to the ancient fortress of Casterly Rock. Having had enough of the King's games, Tywin resigned from his position as Hand of the King and was replaced by Lord Owen Merryweather. Yet without Tywin's wisdom and abilities, the kingdom fell to disrepair, with many lords growing angry and rebellious against the king. Some now seriously considered replacing him with his son Rhaegar, who had proven a strong, smart, and brave man, a Targaryen who might unify the kingdom behind his leadership. As a result, the kingdom and royal court became divided, with those indebted to the king remaining his staunch advocates, while others joined Rhaegar's faction, eager for reform. With so many plots and conspiracies in the air, some have come to believe that Prince Rhaegar indeed was planning to move against his father by sending his men to speak to Lord Went of Harrenhal, possibly convincing him to hold a great tournament, which would serve as a distraction so Rhaegar might secretly meet with the lords of the Seven Kingdoms and conspire against the king. Varys the Spider then learned of these intrigues, informing Aerys, who decided to leave the Red Keep for the first time in 4 years, attending the tournament and disrupting Rhaegar's plans. However, by this point, the king had physically deteriorated into a pale, decrepit old man, leaving a terrible impression with his subjects, who were seeing the king for the first time in years. Yet despite all of the Mad King's mistakes and growing insanity, it would not be Aerys who lit the spark which doomed the kingdom to civil war. That misdeed instead fell to his son Rhaegar, who became champion at the tourney, then shocking those in attendance by naming Lord Robert Baratheon's betrothed, Lyanna Stark, as the Queen of Love and Beauty, ignoring his own wife, Elia Martell, thereby insulting House Baratheon, Stark, and Martell, all in a single action. Rhaegar and Lyanna would then disappear together, leaving most to believe he had kidnapped her and was raping her in the south. Outraged by the action, Lyanna's brother, Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell, rode to King's Landing, demanding that Rhaegar face him and answer for his crimes. But the royal prince was not there, instead finding the Mad King, who had him arrested, then summoning his father, Rickard, to court so he might pay for his son's freedom. But when the Lord of Winterfell arrived in the capital, he was arrested, and both father and son were tortured and killed. Houses Baratheon, Stark, Arryn, and later Tully would then rise up in rebellion, raising their armies and plunging the continent into war. The rebels won a number of early victories, leading the king to dismiss Lord Merryweather, replacing him with Lord John Cunnington. The new hand then led an army against the rebels, but was defeated and exiled across the sea for his failure. The king then named his trusted advisor, Carlton Chelstead, as hand, but it would not do much good, as steadily over the course of the war, the loyalist forces were being pushed back, making a rebel victory seem more and more possible. Refusing to allow his city to fall to a usurper, Aerys consulted with Rosart, Grand Master of the Alchemist's Guild, and together they planted wildfire underneath King's Landing, ready to light the city on fire, leaving nothing but ash for the rebel forces. When the Hand of the King learned of this horrifying plan, he openly objected, even tossing his chain of office to the ground, resigning his position in protest. But the king, now mad beyond reason, had his former advisor burned alive, then naming the pyromancer Rosart as his new hand. The king also sent his son Viserys and pregnant wife Rhaela away to Dragonstone for their safety, but kept Rhaegar's wife Elia and her children in the capital to serve as hostages to ensure Dorne's continued support in the war. But after the Battle of the Trident and the death of Prince Rhaegar, the defeat of House Targaryen seemed inevitable, and so Tywin Lannister, who had remained neutral for much of the war, arrived at the gates of King's Landing, announcing that he had brought his army to defend his old friend the king. Although Varys advised against letting them through the gates, proclaiming it a likely trap, Grand Maester Pycelle advocated in favor of Tywin Lannister, stating that the man could be trusted. Aerys sided with Pycelle, allowing the Westerland army into the city, which then turned against him, sacking King's Landing and murdering Princess Elia and Rhaegar's children. The king had taken one final gamble which had utterly failed, and so prepared to enact his final revenge, demanding that the city be burned, killing all within its walls. But Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard would not allow such a crime to occur, breaking his sworn oath and killing Rosart as well as the king to ensure the order was not carried out. With King Aerys II defeated, Robert Baratheon ascended to the throne, claiming legitimacy through his grandmother Rhaelle Targaryen, and rewarded the Lannisters for their contribution to his victory by marrying Tywin's daughter Cersei, making her Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Meanwhile, with the loyalist Targaryen forces defeated, the last of the Mad King's children in young Viserys and the newly born Daenerys Targaryen were smuggled across the sea to Essos by Sir Willem Darry, where they would spend years attempting to gather support to retake the Seven Kingdoms, determined to reclaim the throne of their father. Although the Mad King's plan to burn King's Landing was foiled by Sir Jaime Lannister, some have recently come to suggest that the wildfire he placed beneath the city was never removed, and may one day be discovered by Cersei Lannister undergoing her own descent into madness, and who may order her advisor Qyburn to ignite the substance, burning the city or a portion of the city to the ground, in a final act of defiance against her enemies in the Sparrow Movement, House Tyrell, and the Royal Court. A special thanks to all those who have contributed to Civilization X. You make these videos possible, and I am eternally grateful for your support. If you would like to help Civilization X and want a say in the future content of this channel, click on the Patreon link in the description box below, and pledge any amount you'd like on a monthly basis. Or if you would prefer to make a single donation, you can use the PayPal link, also in the description below. And please be sure to like and subscribe, and click on the links to see more.